Hi, Principal Matters listeners. This is Will Parker, along with my co-host Jen Schwanke, and we always start off with a Q&A. And the question of the week this week is supported by Summer Pops because principals, when students practice math over the summer, math scores go up. Easy, effective, and affordable. Check out summerpopsworkbooks.com. So Jen, why don't you tell us what Q&A we're going to be chewing on this week before we jump into our wonderful conversation with Jeff Jones.
So this question is going to resonate with all principals, I think. The question is this: what strategies can help principals to maintain focus on long-term vision and direction in the face of daily challenges? And I know exactly what this question means, Will, but why don't you get us started?
Well, I love this question because if you think about it, there's this wonderful story about a guy named Simon Kruger who was an Olympic cross country skier. And I remember watching him ski during I don't remember what Olympics it was. It was the Winter Olympics. And he fell down right at the beginning of the race. He's covered in snow. And I'm like, dude, that guy's out. He's out of the race. Well, then I'm watching it, and those races last forever. And like an hour later, I'm noticing he's like in the front of the pack again. And he wins the race. And afterwards, they ask him, how did you do that? And he's like, well, I switched my focus. I was covered in snow. Everybody's running over me, but I just got up and looked and thought, well, I got to get back to the finish line. I got to get back to the front if I'm going to win this race. And so I think about that because I feel like leaders like that. They're just getting beat up all day long, covered in snow. How in the world do they hold on to like the long-term vision when they have all this stuff that's immediately in front of them? So that's the visual that comes to my mind, Jen, whenever I think about that question.
So your visual is a lot prettier than mine. Mine is of the binder I used to have on my credenza, where at the beginning of every year I would write my goals and I would share them with my leadership team. And then I put the binder away. And, I don't know, 11 and a half months later, I'd get the binder out and I'd be like, oh man, I don't even know. What were my goals last year? So it's so incredibly easy to develop a long-term vision and then promptly forget it because there's been a fight, because there's been a political issue in your district, because you have a new assistant, because like who knows, right? It's so easy to lose focus. So here's the strategy that helps me. It's so incredibly elementary that I'm embarrassed to say it, but I put it on my calendar. I put it on my calendar once or twice a month, and it's a simple word. It's goals question mark, or actions, or think about this. I actually put it on my calendar and I make it a recurring event. Um, I started to do that in my current role because I kind of oversee our we call it a Journey 2030, which is kind of a 10-year plan. And I put it on my calendar to think about that once a month. And I am pretty religious about my calendar. When if something's on there, I do it. And so when I dedicate that hour, nobody else schedules over it because it's on my calendar, and I really do think about
Oh, there's so many ways I could go with
it.
this question. But I'll add a strategy that works for me. And again, what works for you may be different. But I used to keep all of my notes digitally, and I did that for a really long time. And then at some point, I just went back to the old fashioned carrying a notebook with me and writing things down as I'm remembering them so I can follow up on it later. For that works for me now. I've been doing this for the last 3 or 4 years now. But in the very front of my whatever notebook I'm using, because I'll usually run through one every month or every 2 months. But whenever I get a new notebook, the very first thing I do before I do anything else is I open up the first 2 pages and I copy down my goals. My What are the goals that I set for this year? And I recopy them back in the front so that every time I'm carrying my notebook, I know right where my goals are. And it's really weird, Jen, because um, when you do that 4 or 5 times a year, it forces you to go, oh, I forgot I set those goals, or
Right.
that's an important initiative, or guess what? I accomplished it. That's even better when you
Right.
realize you actually did something. So that's a strategy that works for me. So putting it on your calendar, placing it in writing, those are really, really helpful.
Well, and
I'll
there's
add
some
one. Go
research
ahead.
on that. Yeah, there's some research, something like 40% more likely that you'll meet your goals if you write them down. And what I would also add is you might accomplish them, you might have forgotten them, but you also might say, you know what, this isn't a priority anymore. 6 months ago, this was important to me. I haven't thought about it. It's kind of like a sweater you need to actually give to Goodwill because you haven't worn it in 15 years. Like it's okay to recalibrate and say, I'm going to let this one go.
Well, the other beauty of scheduling your goals too, like, and I mean literally, let's say your goal is I want to spend more time in classrooms, then
Mhm.
schedule it in advance on your calendar. And then here's how this worked for me in practice. When you're in the middle of a heat of a situation or you're managing some craziness and it's finally over, what you really want to do is take a break and just rest, but
Mhm.
sometimes you need to. But a lot of times what I would do is immediately look back at my calendar and ask, what was that thing I really wanted to do today? And then go do that.
Mhm.
Just get back
That's
out
right.
there
That's
and
right.
switch that focus back to that thing. Or sometimes literally I would have to tell myself, what is something I can go now to do to remind me why I do this? And I would go find that awesome classroom or that wonderful, for me, sometimes it was going to the choir or the band room and just listening to kids perform for 10 minutes and just recharge my batteries. And I bet
So,
for
my
you,
friends, that is Will shaking off the snow. That's what he's doing there, shaking off the snow and winning the race.
so let's wrap it up there, Jed. But as you guys are stepping into your week, just remember that your long-term visions and strategies are important. So are the daily challenges, but you can switch that focus. But it happens a lot easier when you're intentional and writing those things down. Or one more piece I'll just add too, in having an accountability partner, somebody who can ask you how you doing on those strategies and goals. That can be really helpful too. Well, Jen Schwanke, as we step into this week's conversation with Jeff Jones, who's the CEO of Solution Tree, I'm just really excited for listeners to get to hear this conversation about the lessons he's learned in leading that amazing organization. Actually, since the time that we recorded this, he's announced his upcoming retirement in March. So I'm really glad listeners get an opportunity to meet Jeff in this setting. Until next time, you can always check out the free resources that we have at my website at williamdparker.com. And Jen, how can they find you?
They can find me at jenschwanke.com or email me at jen@jenschwanke.com.
Principal Matters Podcast, episode 429. Hi, friends. This is Will Parker, host of Principal Matters, the School Leaders Podcast, where each week we bring you inspiring, innovative, and imaginative ideas for your own school leadership. This week, we're going to be talking about finding solutions with my special guest, Jeffrey C. Jones. Jeff Jones of Bloomington, Indiana, is a graduate of Kelley School of Business at Indiana University and CEO and chairman of Solution Tree Incorporated, which delivers comprehensive professional development to pre-K 12 educators around the world. Jeff and his business partner, DG Elmore, purchased Solution Tree in 1998, established Solution Tree Canada in 2004, Marzana Research 2008, and Acquiring Results Coaching Global in 2021. Jeff is also the chairman of Sarge Property Management and Hoosier Acres LLC, and he sits on the board of directors at Rachel's Challenge and Marzano Academies and serves as board chairman for Trans World Radio. Jeff is a founding partner and board chair for Sensica Cycling, a not-for-profit professional women's cycling team. And he and his wife, Margaret, have been married since 1996 and blessed with 4 children. Jeff Jones, welcome to Principal Matters Podcast. Why don't you fill in the gaps on that intro and tell listeners something else they may be surprised to know about you?
Thanks, Will. It's good to see you again. I think that bio just wore me out. Let me think, something that's to fill in the gap. So the bike team Siniska is an interesting one because a good friend of mine and I started that, and it's a professional women's cycling team, a nonprofit that races in the United States and Europe. We're having some really good success this year. But the cool thing is Siniska, he came up with the name. Siniska was the first female gold medal winner in the Olympics in 396 BC and then again in 392 BC. Her father was an emperor. She trained horses and he let her race the chariots and she beat the boys 2 Olympics in a row. So
What?
that's where he came up with that name. At least that's the legend that we're using.
Well, stay with that legend. That's amazing.
It's a pretty good one.
Just on a side note, because we're going down this road, I'm reading a book right now called Britannia's by Alicia Albania. It's not sitting in front of me, but she's a journalist and researcher, an amazing author, and she's traveled to all the outlying islands around the UK and just kind of dove into their history. And so much of the history of those islands goes all the way back to Roman invasion or the Neolithic time periods. And almost in every single island she's on, she'll find some legend or myth connected back to the women also on that island. So now I've got another one to add to the list of legends throughout history. The first time that we met, we were talking off the recording before we started, was in Edmond, Oklahoma, when you were there along with the Solution Tree team doing some amazing professional development. And just for listeners, in case they don't know, my second book, Messaging Matters, inspiring students, motivating teachers, and reaching school communities, was done with Solution Tree Press. And so being a part of this small family is just an honor for me to sit in the room with you. But one of the reasons that I wanted to bring you into this conversation, Jeff, several reasons. First of all, I'm just such a big fan of the resources and the products and the books and the PD that you guys provide. And second, I've been a big fan of your podcast, which you were doing a lot. It's called Schoolhouse, I believe.
Inside the treehouse.
Inside the treehouse. See, I should have gotten the title.
There you go. No, that's
Inside
good.
the treehouse. And you're a great interviewer. And some of the best conversations I've heard with Solution Tree providers have been ones that you've led. So as a fan of your work, I wanted to get you on this show because I wanted to dive into a couple of conversations with you. One about the work you're doing Solution Tree, but also about the work you've seen other leaders do. So let's start first with, although you have your hands in lots of other ventures, Solution Tree is known worldwide for its commitment to professional learning communities and professional development. Can you share your story? What inspired you to step into this work as CEO of Solution Tree?
Yeah, so it's I'll just try and give you the cliff notes because I could talk through the whole podcast about how this got started. But DG Elmore, as you mentioned, is my business partner, and he's been a dear friend for years. In fact, he performed the wedding ceremony for my wife and I back in '96. We bought Solution Tree in '98. We had our first daughter, Charlotte. We have 4 children, girl, boy. And we did the Lion King thing, where you bring the baby back and you hold it over your head and you show all the world this cool thing that I've created. I'm like the first person to ever have a baby. And so we were at their house and he and I were having breakfast, and he has 6 children that were running around the house. And he asked if I wanted to buy this little company called National Educational Service. He was going to buy it, and he told me about it, and this is what he's looking for. And I said, no, I'm not really interested. We lived in Lexington, Massachusetts. Baby was born. I had a good job. So he said, well, just take a look at the information, take a look at the company, see what you think. So I looked at it. It's a feel-good company. So we talked some more, and I said, yeah, I'm not sold on it. And so anyways, long story short, after 2 no's, I talked to my wife about it and we agreed to give it a shot. So we packed up and moved back to Indiana. She's from the East Coast. We're living in Massachusetts. I told her 5 to 7 years and we'll sell the business and move back to the East Coast. And it's been 27. So I'm a little bad on my math. But the business was what a lot of people do when they sell businesses. They harvest off all the cash that they can, which is logical. They don't put any money in research and development or new product, and you patch all the cracks in the walls. And so we bought it. There was no money. There was no new product, and the cracks were all pretty well patched up. So it was a struggling little business, to be honest with you. And the previous owner wanted to get out of the operations. It's just nothing that he liked at all. So a book came out a month before we bought the business called Professional Learning Communities at Work by Rick DeFore and Bob Ager. And before I moved back to Bloomington to work with the previous owner and kind of get integrated into the business, I read that book and I thought, this book makes sense. If I can understand it, educators can understand it. If I can understand it, I can market and sell it. And one thing, Will, that I consider myself is that I am the most average human being in the world. I mean, yeah, I'm 5'9"-ish. I'm a little bit taller than 5'9", 160 pounds, brown hair, used to be brown hair, blue eyes, born and raised in the Midwest. My dad owned a small business. My mom was a stay-at-home, lived on Indiana Avenue in LaPorte, Indiana. I went to all public schools my whole life. And my name is Jeff Jones, for goodness sakes. You can't get any more average than that. So I see the world through the eyes of an average person. And so if I understand it, then I think more people will understand it too. So I became friends with Rick DeFore and Bob Aker, the authors of Professional Learning Communities at Work, that August, where we had a conference, a small conference with 90 people at it. And that just kind of built our friendship and relationship together. And Rick has since passed. But Bob and I are still friends, good friends. I talked to him just this past weekend when Tennessee beat Indiana in baseball, and they're going to go to play Evans, so we have a lot of good friends. So it all started with that. And the company was built around professional learning communities, at which one point it was over 60% of our business, because we were trying to get other authors and so forth to publish with us, and we had to prove that we could do it. It's a much smaller percentage of our business now, but I used to be the MC at all the conferences. We had one conference and went to 3 conferences, and we do 6 conferences, mainly for cost, and for 2, I wanted to see what's going on. And one year I took the binder that we gave, their 3-ring binder with the clips. Remember those?
Yep.
And I sat and listened to all the keynotes, went to breakout sessions, and wrote notes in it with the same binder 6 times in a row. Came back to the office, and we had a company retreat, and it was called What I Learned on My Summer Vacation. And so we started to implement the practices of professional learning communities inside Solution Tree, which the practices of PLC came from business and were implemented into education. So then I kind of took it and morphed it from there back into business. And that's how we have grown the business. We've had 2 years where we weren't bigger than the previous year. One was in 2012, which came off the heels of the financial crisis and the funding that was given to schools. It ran out. There was a funding cliff. And the second one was COVID. And then the next year after that, we were ahead of the year before. So we just grown by rinse and repeat, just doing what we're doing as well as we can do it.
Well, I want to back up to a couple of things you said. First of all, Rick DeFore and Bob Aker, just both legends in the work of education and education leadership. I love it that Rick's high school is still a place where people go even now to visit and learn. And of course, Rick and Rebecca both were just legends in the work that they did too. If you don't mind, because we're walking down memory lane, I'd love to go back to those first conversations with Rick and Bob. And what was it like for them to have someone step in and say, hey, I see the value of what you're doing. Let's see if we can expand this circle even bigger. Because, I'm sure at that point, there was a limit on the amount of availability that they've had. And now their work is literally worldwide. I'm not exaggerating the scope of the work you guys have done. So take us back there for a minute.
So this is a fun story, actually. The first time I met Rick and Bob was in Tremblant, Canada, where we had our PLC Institute. Why we're in Tremblant, Canada, I still am not quite sure why that's where the Institute was, except that the previous owner spoke French. So it seemed like a good idea, I guess. So Bob calls me up into my hotel room. We're in the same hotel, obviously. He calls me up in his, beautiful Southern accent, says, Jeff, Rick and I'd like to have a beer with you before dinner. We got a question. So sure. So we go down and meet. And so they basically had a problem, and they pulled out their royalty check or their royalty statement. And they had sold 6,000 books, and it basically said they owed us money because of the way they calculated the royalties. And I said, well, wow, this is a bad idea. So I said, we'll fix it. I'll go ahead and fix that. And then came back and realized we needed to fix a lot of authors' royalty structure. And it wasn't, the previous owners weren't doing it to be mean, but like I said, operationally, they just were trying to figure out how to make a living and do things right. So I paid them back royalties for the year. And one of our guiding principles, our core values at Solution Tree is integrity, period. And so it's our integrity, to be honest with you. So we're transparent with everybody about how we do the royalties and so forth. So that was the first one. Then I asked Rick, I said, we'd like to make a video series about professional learning communities, which are 3 videos and a clamshell with a facilitator's guide, VHS tapes, and you send them out. And he said, well, I'll do one, but I can't have it hurt my professional development because I need that, because that's the money I'm saving to send Matthew to college. And I said, if the video starts eating into your professional development, we'll stop producing it and I'll stop selling it. And I said, you have my word on it. He said, okay. Well, the video did nothing but enhance that. But it's making promises that you can keep. Don't make promises you can't keep. And that's how we built a relationship. And I miss Rick and Becky both, who are both passed now terribly. I was at their wedding when they got married. I can tell you that it was 22 years ago because we took our youngest son in a car seat to the wedding. He was a brand new baby. So who's now a 22-year-old college senior. But that's how we started the relationship and built the relationship. And then every year, Rick and Bob, and then when Becky joined the team, we'd get together and we'd talk about the business, what we had done, and what we're going to do in the future. In fact, when Rick was retiring from Stevenson, Adlai Stevenson High School in Lincolnshire, Illinois, I went up to Lincolnshire and in his office, and I handed him a 2-sheet piece of paper, front and back on one side and halfway down on the other side. And it was titled Life After Stevenson. And I listed all the things that we can do to grow the business. And he says, I'm retiring. I don't want to do all this. So, well, let's just talk about what you do want to do and just realize that all these things on here will do. You just have to participate, whether it's writing your book or doing events or building PD and so forth. So it was a partnership between Rick and Bob and I, as much as anything, where we designed how we were going to grow the business and what we do. So I'm talking too much maybe, but here's a brief explanation about how Solution Tree works. We're really an agent for authors. So, Will, if you came to me and said, and I'm sorry you didn't have a really good publisher for your first book, but I'm glad you found one for your second. If you came to me and said, I'm the best teacher in the country for autistic kids K through 3rd grade. I speak 100 times a year. I make $10,000 every time I speak, so I'm grossing $1 million. But I'm sick of the scheduling, the billing, the collections, the handouts, the phone calls. I'll give you 30% if you manage the business. I'd say, no thanks, but thank you very much. Good luck. But if you come to me like you did and said, here's my manuscript that shows I'm an expert in this particular area of expertise, and we vet it and we find it, then we publish the book, we market the book, you're involved in all that with developmental letters and so forth. We then send the book out and we have you speaking. We say, okay, well, we're got 120 days for you next year. You say, no, I'm not doing 120. 100 is where I stop. So then you find experts that understand your content as well as you do or can. And then we do the scheduling of booking the associates, and then you get kind of a royalty off of them doing your work. Because now they have to pass our muster, because when you represent your work, you're representing your work. When Solution Tree represents your work, we're representing your work and our company. So we have to make sure that the quality is up there where we need it to be. And then we'll design 2-day workshops for you, maybe some institutes to a summit. And then we're going to introduce you to a special ed teacher where we think your work good, so you guys can write a book together. And then rinse and repeat, you do the same thing. And we stuck true to that model. So we bought the company in 98. I think the model was finally morphed into reality sometime around 2001. It took us a while to figure out what the heck we were doing.
Let's take a moment to thank our sponsors, and then we'll be right back. Everyone talks about the power of data-driven instruction, but what does that actually look like? Look no further than IXL, the ultimate online learning and teaching platform for K-12. IXL gives you meaningful insights that drive real progress, and research can prove it. Studies in nearly all 50 states show that schools that use IXL outperform other schools on state tests. Educators who use IXL love that they can easily see how their school is performing in real time to make better instructional decisions. And IXL doesn't stop at just data. IXL also brings an entire ecosystem of resources for your teachers with a complete curriculum, personalized learning plans, and so much more. It's no wonder that IXL is used in 95 of the top 100 school districts. Ready to join them? Visit IXL.com/PM to get started.
You're listening to Principal Matters, the School Leaders Podcast.
Wow. So I want to back up to one other time period in the development of the country, the development of the company, and that is COVID, because I'm trying to think back in 2012, I had not published with you guys yet, but I was an author with Solution Tree by 2020. And so I watched closely as you were responding to the crisis. And I have to just say, as an outsider, Jeff, a couple of things that I appreciated, but I want to pick your brain of what it was like to be in your shoes. Because as an outsider, what I appreciated was your ability to step into the crisis through enhancing communication from the office you're sitting in right now, because you
Right.
started creating videos, you started giving updates, you started just really kind of bringing people into here's what we're doing. But I would just really appreciate to know what it was like to be in a moment where your company is, I mean, I'm sure like everyone else, you're hemorrhaging, you're losing all your events. How did you, what lessons do you feel like you learned through that crisis that are still with you?
Yeah, that was a interesting time for everybody. Everybody had their own crises. Um, so a little backstory is my wife's from the East Coast and we lived on the East Coast and we have a little ski house in Stowe, Vermont that we've had since about the time that Rick and Becky got married. And so my wife was out there for another event in that week in March. And so two of our kids were in college on the East Coast and another one, well, they got to Virginia, Maine, and Boston. And then our youngest one was still in high school here in Indiana. So when COVID broke out, they were all on the East Coast and I was here. So I got my son and 17 years old and packed him in a car and said, you're driving to Rochester first to go stay with relatives and you're going on the Stowe. So my wife and family were all in Vermont. And we did that for about 6 months. And I drove back and forth to Vermont probably a half a dozen times because I don't miss kids' birthdays and stuff like that. So I'm in the house by myself, just focusing on how do we fix the business or how do we save the business, not fix it. It wasn't broken. So we thought about delivery systems. What do we have that can be delivered better? What do we have that teachers really want? So we had free webinars about the learning loss. We set up a website called Travel Free PD. We took our professional development and broke it into chunks instead of one long day. And we really got into Zoom. We started portable event packages, which are videotaped all the different events that you can pick and choose, and you have it for a year. So you can see breakout sessions because we have tremendous footage of all the events that we do. So I'll be down in my office at home, and I had been down in the basement, and I followed my same routine, get up, work out, everything you usually do. And then I'd work literally from about 7:30 until 8 o'clock at night. And I knew it was 8 o'clock at night because Turner Classic Movies had a movie on at 8 o'clock at night. And I don't know what it was, but I was going to watch it because then I didn't have to think anymore. I just watched. First time I ever saw Casablanca. So you go through that. So you just figure out a phrase that I've used for years and years is think of yourself as the customer. And that works in all aspects of business. Whether you're the customer with inside the company that you're handing off the order to or something else to. But if you put your hands in the seat of a teacher and that, what does a teacher need right now? They don't need somebody trying to sell them something. They need a solution that can help them with the current problems that they have. So we embraced a concept called it's called not first impression. I've already forgot the phrase. But it's basically that when it's time to purchase something, or when it's time that you can actually decide, here's what you need, they already think of us because we've been their friend through the whole process. So you basically scrap the whole concept, a business concept of making money, and you do a concept of how do we help these poor educators who are getting beat up from parents, from newspapers, from legislators, from the media, from kids. How do you help a teacher who can't get kids to even log into their Zoom meetings and stuff? How do you take care of the learning? First position, that's what it's called, first position. So when you take it and think of yourself as the customer, it gives you a whole different perspective on how to solve problems. The problem was not us making a living or making a profit. That was out the window. It wasn't a top priority at all. Problem is, how do you help these poor educators? And so that's how we went about it, the whole business. And
I
my
love that.
business partner drove out to my house one day just to come see if I was okay, because it's like I was like a hermit in there, and I think he was afraid I was going to be sitting on top of the roof of my house playing a trombone or something. But
So Jeff, what I love about that is what you said as you wrapped up that time period, scrapping making money to help educators meet their needs, which, you mentioned these two values earlier: integrity, period, and making promises that you can keep. So I want to, it's a great segue into my next question, which is, in addition to leading a company that has been so successful in doing exactly those things, you've also spent a lot of time with educators. And so in my work, as a former practicing principal and as someone who supports leaders and coaches leaders and works with leaders, I get a side-by-side view often in their work, but you've stood beside leaders in all kinds of contexts, and for a very long time. And so I wanted to ask you, as a leader among leaders, what lessons have you learned that have helped you? First of all, I want to talk about that have helped you in the way that you serve others. And then I'll ask a second question about advice you'd give to new leaders. But first, I just want to sit on your own leadership, because you lead an organization that provides a lot of professional development and care for others, but you're doing it side by side with leaders. And I know, I'm imagining in the work that you do that involves a lot of strategy, a lot of operations work, a lot of tactical work. So I know you could write a book on this, so you can take this whatever direction you want, but I'm just curious, what are some of those takeaways for you as a leader among leaders to provide those kinds of services?
So I've been really blessed in this job, as you said, to work with a lot of great educators, but even more so people like yourself who have spent their life writing books on specific areas, and we've done leadership. Doug Reeves has become a dear friend of mine, and a great friend. Bob Marzano is in the top 10 list of friends that I have, when he and I started Marzano Resources 15 years ago. Rick DeFore, like I said, so I go to Rick's house. Bob and I went to Rick's house, and they moved or I guess I was better by myself on this time, but he moved the hospice bed into his bedroom. And so I'm sitting next to him, and he says, I got a request for you. I said, okay, anything you want. And one of the requests was, would you be kind of oversee my celebration of life, kind of be the person, the master of ceremonies, if you will. And I said, well, two things, Rick. One is, absolutely, I'll do whatever you ask me to do. And two, I thought you liked me more than that, you know? But you become great friends with somebody in the good times and the bad times. So that's where I've been blessed, and watched their leadership, how they've survived struggles and how they've persevered. And great researchers like Bob Marzano, who once told me, and I had t-shirts made out of it, he said, meta-analysis is just a fancy way of saying quantitative synthesis. That, I don't even know what quantitative synthesis means, but, so first of all, it's becoming an expert at your trade. And that's what I see in authors like yourself, Will. I mean, what a great professional career you had before you wrote the book that you published with Solution Tree, and that you've had since. So you become somebody who wants to be great at their own profession. So, because I can't write a book, I'll never write a book. I can't do the things in education. I've never been an educator. I worked in 3 universities before I did this. So I know higher education, I know regular education. But you figure out what your wheelhouse is, and then you develop it from there. One of the things that we did at Solution Tree when we had that retreat, and then the next year's retreat, is we wrote our mission, vision, values, and goals. And we wrote those, I think, in 2005, and we still hold true to those same mission, vision, values, and goals. And we learned that from professional learning communities. And our core values are passion for our purpose, dedication to quality, develop individual potential, profitable growth, because you have to have profits to have growth, and integrity, period. So you have to know what your values are, and you can't, and we recite our mission and vision out loud before every leadership and department meeting that we have.
Wow.
So
I love that.
I think that answered your question.
Yeah, it does. And I'm so glad you said that because you're just reminding me one of the practices that I have when I'm stepping into a group of leaders, maybe it's for a half a day of PD or a full day or whatever the context is. It could be that I'm working with them for a full year. But the very first thing that I do, and it doesn't matter how experienced these leaders are, we always set norms. Like, what are the
Yeah.
norms we're going to have around this learning together? And in some ways, it might seem, I don't know, unnecessary. These are all educators, but I just can't help it because, and usually even partway through the day, I'll stop and say, okay, back up now. And let's talk about the practices that we've been employing to learn together. Because there's just something powerful about doing exactly what you said, which is if we're not modeling the values that we teach, then I don't think we're really I don't think we're really living out the example that we need to.
Right.
The follow-up question that I have for you is one that you may or may not feel comfortable answering, but I want to ask it this way anyway. I want you to just pretend for a moment you're getting to sit down to coffee for a few minutes with a young leader, or maybe someone just stepping into a new situation. In my case, my listeners are often going to be stepping into leading in a new school setting or a district setting. And I'm just curious if you could give them some things to keep in mind in new environments. What would be those one or two things, Jeff, that you would tell a leader to keep in mind just based on the years you've had in leadership?
So a couple things, if I can. Well, the first is servant leadership. Figure out what servant leadership means to you and be that servant to the leaders. Be a leader like that. If you think you know everything, then you probably don't know anything.
Mhm.
Right? So you need to put people or give people opportunities to lead, delegate authority or responsibility, however you want to phrase it, and then step back and let them do it. For one, there's a lot of young leaders who want opportunities to show that they can be leaders. So this not only takes it off of your plate to try and do everything, it gives them something to do, and you have to trust but verify. I mean, you trust that they can do it, verify, give them guidance on what you want, be very clear on what you want done and how you want it done. At least the guardrails, give them some autonomy so they can do it their own way. But you have to, as a leader, you have to learn to delegate things off. If not in education, they will let you do everything and you will implode. I mean, how many people get burned out in education because they don't know how to delegate and they don't trust that it can get done without them? I was told once, if I give up 100% responsibility for this particular task and they only do it 80% as well as I did it, I just got 100% of that time back with 80% achievement. But then if I coach them, they might take that 100% that I did and make it even better.
Yeah.
So you have to learn to lead, not just take a leadership role. You've got to learn to lead.
Well, Principal Matters listeners, I want you to rewind that last 2 minutes of this conversation. And when you're stepping into whatever situation you're stepping into in leadership, but I think thinking you know everything is not leadership. Servant leadership is where it all begins. Developing the capacity in others and then trusting others by guiding them, being clear with them, and then verifying that the work is happening. Jeff, before we leave this conversation, I'm going to ask something really selfish. And that is, now that I've moved from educator to education provider, this has been the first year that I've had to kind of put on that full-time business hat too. So I'm going to guess that the same advice that you're giving to those education leaders, you've had to practice in the work that you do there in Solution Tree too. And so, so this is a selfish question because I'm just so curious. You guys have an enormous team of people now. And so how do you guys manage holding on to that kind of clarity of vision and mission and purpose with that many people that you're serving and leading?
First of all, we repeat it all with boring redundancy. I mean, we just beat it into everybody. We had a marketing firm come in one time and do analysis. And one of the things he did is said, okay, everybody take a piece of paper and write down what the company does. What's the mission of the company? And then he went through his thing and he came back for lunch. He said, All right, well, you all have kind of wiped out my presentation for right after lunch because you all wrote the exact same thing. Because advance the work of our authors. That's it, 6 words. That's what we do over and over and over. And that's our mission. So it's interesting because at one point, and I've got a picture in the office, that we had our staff retreat, and it's me and 7 women. That's it. That's the whole company. Everybody else thought we were going under, left. As Rick DeFore said one time, they're leaving for medical reasons. They're getting sick and tired of working for me. Whatever the reasons were, we had 7 left. Now we're just about to break 400 people. And we got offices, 6 offices. We just closed a foreign company that we had over in Australia. They haven't responded well to COVID. It was not the right thing to try and keep doing that. But it was actually more fun to run a business when it was like 20 of us. But the key then goes back to the leadership thing. So the head of my accounting, he's in charge of accounting. The CFO, he's in charge of accounting. He tells me what to do. Now, I can veto his decisions, but he's the money guy. He's the one who says our cost of goods sold are too high. We're not doing enough here. We're doing enough there. The president of the company is a guy named Ed Ackerman, a brilliant man, Mensa. He had 26 years in the military before I got him to come to Solution Tree. He's an operational genius. So let him run the operations. He and I meet on a regular basis. He briefs me. I ask questions. He goes off and does it. I have a lot of background in marketing and sales. I was a fundraiser in 3 different universities. So I can help marketing and sales a little bit more. But if you hire somebody to be in charge of marketing, you better let them be in charge of marketing. They're going to leave and you got to start all over again. So it's back to that whole leadership thing, delegate it off. We need good legal counsel because we have a tremendous amount of PD contracts and stuff. We're not a litigious company. We don't sue anybody. But we have to have a lot of things done. Well, hire the right person and let him manage all the contracts. I'm not going to read all those contracts. Hopefully he's the right guy. So acquisitions. The whole company is built off of advance the work of your authors. So you better have the right book, right? So we got Douglas Rife to come to Solution Tree. He was president of Quorum Press for 7 years. And he's been with me now for 13 or 14 years. I leave acquisition. We have an acquisitions team or approval team. It's him and me. He tells me what to publish. And unless I think it doesn't fit within the culture of the business, which is 2 out of 100 books that I say, yeah, no, we're not going to do this one, that they want to have. I get final veto power, but it's benevolent dictatorship in that regards. So, you just have to have people let them trust. And then we all get together, we meet on a regular basis. We have leadership team meeting. So the first month of every quarter, every department has to come back to Bloomington. They don't come back in the same day, but they come back because we've morphed our building into a training facility, if you will. And if any educators out there listening want to do a workshop in our building, it's here, no charge. Bloomington, Indiana, it's gorgeous. So they all come in for a day to a day and a half of meetings, the first month of every quarter. The second and third month of every quarter, all the leadership comes in, which all the heads of all the departments, the different offices, everybody comes in. It's 22 of us or 23 of us. And we get together for a full day of meetings. The agenda is there. We go over our key performance indicators, which are called KPIs. We go over our strategic plan, which is a 3-year plan. We go over that every month. We don't write it, put it on a shelf, dust it off at the end of the year. We go through it each and every month. We go over the financials. Everybody knows where we stand financially. There's no secrets. Anybody in our company can see the financials. They just can't see other people's salaries. So the full transparency. As Mama used to tell me, if you don't lie, you don't have to remember anything. So we don't have any secrets. So it's a lot easier to manage. So the only way to do it is with communications. Now, when everybody went remote and flexible, we went from 98 people in this building, and I think there's maybe a dozen here on a regular basis. But people come in and out all the time. So you have to keep communications open. You have to have those department meetings. I mean, we live on Zoom, all of us. So, and how it'll be, a lot of people are telling their staff they got to come back in the buildings. It's not like a school. Our teachers don't live in this town. They're all scattered. I had a woman who just spent the last 2 months in Brazil, where her husband's from. She did her work there on the same time zone. So,
well,
yeah, it's been a challenge, but it's working.
Yeah. Well, what I love about that strategy is, again, there's so many great practices there, Jeff. And as we wrap up, I just want to say a couple of things. First of all, on behalf of someone who's been the beneficiary of the authors, the Solution Tree has advanced, and the professional learning that Solution Tree has offered, thank you. Because I know that when you think about people like Doug Reeves and Bob Marzano and Anthony Muhammad and so many other authors that I can mention who have done great work with Solution Tree. Or if I go to an event and Mike Mattis is inspiring me, within each of their own work, they all have a reason to be proud, and the skills that they bring are just so valuable. But the legacy that Solution Tree is leaving is something that you've had your fingerprints on the entire time that I've been aware of its work. So thank you for the commitment that you've made to advance the work of great educators, and for the legacy that you've built through this organization, because I talked to so many people who've been inspired by the work, who may not know always who's behind the work. So thank you to you and your team for just the amazing work that you guys do. And as we wrap up, I would just like listeners to know any parting words that you'd like them to keep in mind as they think about the work you guys do at Solution Tree, and then how can they stay connected with your work?
Wow. So the work we do at Solution Tree, you can find all that on the webpage and search it. And I guess more so than that, what I would say, if you're going to do professional development, there's a few things that you need to do before you hire anybody, because funds are going to get tighter now. One is make sure that the people that you hire know what the heck they're doing. Ask for track record, ask for examples, who's done it. And then if they're going to send you a consultant, make sure that consultant has done the work as well. That it's just not some hired gun off the street that they're paying a roll or a fee to for an independent contractor. Read this manual, go present this thing like it's an Excel spreadsheet presentation in a Holiday Inn conference room. But check the quality and verify, because there's so much opportunities out there to acquire a vendor or a consultant to do it. Make sure you're hiring the right one. It doesn't have to be us. I mean, Solution Tree cannot do all the professional development in the country. Solution Tree cannot put on all the events. We cannot have all the consultants. We can't publish the books. The CEO of Sage, which owns Quorum Press, is a good friend of mine. I've sent things to him and I said, hey, you guys need to focus on this because we're on it together. I've spoken to ASCD. I've spoken to Learning Forward. Here's what you need to do, or here's what we're doing. Do what you wish. I'll tell everybody what we do and how we did it. I'm not necessarily going to tell you what we're going to do, but I'll tell you everything that we have done. So just trust and verify. Again, I said that phrase earlier. Make sure, check your references, whoever you hire, and make sure they know what they're doing, because there's nothing more important than educating our population. It is the future of this country. There are lives to be saved if we do it properly. I mean, we're saving kids' lives. We're saving communities. The community needs leaders. Every community does, where it's the community of your home, the community of your town, the community of your county, of your state, of the country. And they're coming from these kids that are in our classrooms, each and every one of them. So it's kind of important work. So make sure that whoever you hire is going to help you the way you want helped.
Well, Jeff Jones, I want to say thank you on behalf of Principal Matters listeners for giving us this time to learn from you and to learn more about what Solution Tree is doing. And just so my listeners know, Solution Tree is not a paid sponsor of this podcast. So this is not a sales job. This is Will's curiosity finally getting satiated by an opportunity to sit in the room with Jeff Jones and pick his brain. So Jeff, thank you. And Principal Matters listeners, I will put links to Solution Tree's resources in the show notes and encourage you to reach out. Jeff, as you wrapped up, trust and verify. I'm just going to say one other quick story. When I was looking at the book that I ended up doing with Solution Tree, I remember a friend of mine at the school level, at district level, telling me just how much she admired Solution Tree as a provider of professional development. And I won't tell you who, but there were you guys and one other group were reaching out to me about the possibility of that book. And I was so happy to go with Solution Tree because of its reputation and its integrity. And so thank you for this opportunity. Principal Matters listeners, thank you for for doing what matters, and we'll talk to you again soon. You can find free resources like this one at williamdparker.com. Subscribe for our free weekly newsletter, which contains bonus material, and also check out the links for Grow Academies, Masterminds, Executive Coaching, and Keynote presentations from my books, as well as from Principal Matters Associates. You can find out more under our speakers tab at williamdparker.com. Thank you for learning together, and thank you for doing what matters.
Principal Matters.